Ladies and gentlemen, I think we are going to start. And I would like to welcome you to this workshop organized by SEDN, the .nl registrar in the Netherlands, and the Netherlands Internet Governance Forum. This workshop is called Let's Break Down Silos in Cybersecurity and Cybercrime. And that is something which came up in a panel NL IGF organized here, not here in Bali, but at this IGF, in which someone said, we don't need to break down silos, we just need front doors where we can talk and meet and discuss points. Well, that is what actually we are going to try to do now. Why are we here? We have invited many organizations around the world, from around the world, that are actually cooperating in a successful or near successful way, and perhaps even in a less successful way, and striving to become better. And hopefully we also have some people who want to learn from our experience. We're going to try to extract in this 90 minutes some best practices on cooperation. And there are going to be questions people can answer ad hoc, basically, when they feel comfortable to answer. You can see the stage is empty. We have no panel, no presentations beyond this introduction. Tel is sitting there. He's going to count when I ask you to raise hands, and so that it can be reported to the online world and to the transcript. So that's basically what we're going to try to do. And I'm going to start with a couple of questions. And everybody is allowed to answer, but of course I've organized people from the technical community, civil society, name it, and they will be here. And the only thing I've asked them is not to present on who they are, on what they are. We're going to try to find their best practices. And if somebody is going to be too long in their answer, I'm going to cut them short because we only have 90 minutes to come up with these best practices. I think it's something new to the IGF. No one on a stage, no presentation. We're going to see how this works, and we're going to put it online, these results. So the first question is, who represents government in this room? Please, a show of hands.
Yes, I see 5 hands for people, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hands, people representing 6, actually 7 people representing government.
Thank you. Who represents civil society?
$11 people representing civil society.
And of course, there's more than one answer possible, because who is here representing the technical community?
I see 11 people representing the technical community.
And who is representing something which I haven't mentioned yet? NGO or international.
5 people are representing something else.
That sounds very good. So we have something else in the room, and that is also of course, very diverse. If I go from there, you all started out somewhere, some longer time ago, at the beginning of the internet, or when it was commercialized, others perhaps more recently, with more regular problems, of the more newer problems which we ran into over time. I'm just going to ask some people to reflect on what was the cause that your organization came into being. And who would like to start? Just raise your hand and the microphone will be walked up to you. But please, every time, state your name and affiliation, please.
Hi, I'm Barry Leba, and I'm here talking about an organization called MOG, the Messaging, Malware, and Mobile Anti-Abuse Working Group. And we started off as the Messaging Anti-Abuse Working Group, trying to do something about all the spam you got in your inbox, and then expanding that out to the malware you got in your inbox, and things that if you click on them, they take over your computer. And it gradually went out from there. But it was a bunch of companies who provide email services and email software and use email services who needed this problem fixed, and that's where we came from.
And you're around since?
Sorry?
You're around since how long?
Since about 2003 or 4.
Thank you.
And my name is Jari Arko, and I represent, although I'm not quite sure I like this term represent, we are all associated with various kinds of parties, but I'm with the Internet Engineering Task Force, or IGF, and that of course is the standardization organization for core internet technologies, and we've been around 30 years now. Some of our documents have been around even longer, so basically formed around documenting the technical solutions around the core of the internet.
Who's next?
Oh, hi, my name is Arle Gerkens. I'm president of InHope, what is the international network of all hotlines on child sexual abuse material. And I'm also the managing director of the Dutch hotline. And the reason we became to be was the fact that when the internet became bigger, we also saw the problem of child sexual abuse material being on the internet. And mainly the industry at that point said, we don't want this on our networks. How can we deal with it?
Over there, yeah. Liesel, please.
So my name is, okay, I have to stand up, sorry. My name is Christine Hopers. I'm here, could be wearing several hats. I'm from CERT Brazil. We are not for profit, around since 1997. And I also have some active roles into FIRST, that's the Forum of Instant Response Teams, and I'm also trying to create a community of CERTs in Latin America. But I think Martin could also talk about FIRST a little bit.
My name is Maarten van Orenbeek. I'm a board member of FIRST, which is the Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams. FIRST has existed since 1989 and brings together incident response and security teams from actually all stakeholder communities.
Hello everybody, my name is Paul Fellinger. I'm here for Internet and Jurisdiction, the global multi-stakeholder policy network. You asked the question why we were created or what was the reason. It was basically born in 2012 out of the need that there was a need for a space that not only bridges the different stakeholder groups, but also the policy siders of digital economy, human rights, and cybersecurity, in order to find solutions to the jurisdictional problems on the internet that are as transnational as the internet itself.
Good afternoon. My name is Liesel Franz, and I'm with the U.S. Department of State. I'm with an office called the Office of the Coordinator for Cyber Issues, and while the State Department has been around for hundreds of years, my office has only been around for 5.5. We were created to help implement something called the International Strategy for Cyberspace that was put forward in the early days of the Obama administration. It covers not only cybersecurity, but also cybercrime, what we call international security in cyberspace, internet governance, internet freedom, development issues, and defense. And in developing the strategy, we realized that we had a lot of excellence in the US government in dealing with all of these issues, but they were silos of excellence as we developed the strategy. And the office was created to help coordinate those efforts from a policy perspective now, not a particularly technical one, but from a policy perspective to coordinate them across the US government, how we were addressing these issues in global communities, but also be a belly button, shall we say, for coordinating efforts in all of those areas with our international partners.
Thank you.
My name is Roelof Meijer. I'm with the Dutch Registry for the country code.nl. I'm not going to explain why we were created and when, but there's an initiative that we've been involved in, even in the startup of that initiative, that we call Abuse Hub. And in short, what it does is it collects abuse information and process it and then distribute it to parties concerned, who mostly are ISPs and hosting companies. Why was it created? Because the individual ISPs and hosting companies made huge cost to collect the information, but it was not specifically for them only. So they got a huge amount of information where they had to sieve through and get the information that was relevant to their customers, infected customer PCs and other equipment. And what the hub does is that it cleans out that information and sends it to the specific ISP or hosting company. So there was a common problem that could only be solved by a collaboration. And it was created about 3 years ago.
Hello, I'm David van Duren. I'm from the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise. And that was launched in 2015 at the Global Conference on Cyberspace in The Hague. And the goal is actually, or the reason why it's launched, is because on a global level, best practices on cyber capacity building, to bring them to the global level, make them available and accessible. So we are a very young platform. For now, like 1.5 years, and there's a lot to do in this area.
Hi, my name is Belisario Contreras. I'm the Cybersecurity Program Manager at the Organization of American States. Maybe not all at the State Department, not sure. We are the oldest regional organization of the world, actually before the UN. Our work is to promote cyber capacity building through the Western Hemisphere. It's important to point out that member states are from Canada to Chile, so it's 34 member states. We're trying to promote national strategies, the development of national certs, crisis management exercises. We just had an excellent panel on awareness raising campaigns, working on research and expertise, and of course, actually, our presence here at the IGF and our presence at other forums like the GFCE and work with other partners like FIRST, ISACA, ICANN, MISOC, and etc. Is because our member states have recognized the importance of working with other actors, private sector, civil society, technical community, the academia, in order actually to break these silos, which is a very interesting session that you have organized.
Hello, my name is Juan Gonzalez with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Office of Cybersecurity and Communications, which is where the the home of the U.S. CERT, and also the NCIC, which is the National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center. We do work closely with the State Department as the lead for international engagements, but we do a lot of the internal domestic U.S. operations and response to cyber incidents.
Hi, Michael Kaiser, National Cybersecurity Alliance, United States. We were founded in 2001, actually, directly after the 9/11 attack in New York, because by industry to work with our partners in government, because they realized there were infrastructure elements to that attack. Maybe not cyber at that point, but they were forward-thinking people who looked ahead and said, we've got to do things to educate people to protect cybersecurity, and we have to do it by working in concert with industry and government, working together in collaboration, because that's a major silo that has to be addressed in our area. It's in education awareness. There are many, many other areas that can be addressed in that way. Thank you.
Hello, Marco Hoogwenning, RIPE NCC. Where do we come from? Well, RIPE NCC as secretary to the RIPE community. RIPE community started back in 1989, kind of as a group exchanging experiences of building the internet in Europe. Since 1992, we also act as the regional internet registry. And yeah, we've, well, I don't think we've been breaking down silos. We started off as one big family and saw the silos being built around us.
Hey, my name is Carlos Duron. I represent government Tlaquepaque and IT legal services. I am engineer and lawyer. I'm interested in collaborate and contact another specialists around the world in focus on forensic themes to analyze cybercrime, collaborate with all organizations for foment a culture of security and preventions.
Thank you. Anybody else who would like to join in? Okay. Then I think it's time to do our first identification of what leads to best practices. I think what we saw here is that everybody has responded to some sort of a problem or some sort of a cause to start changing things. And somebody took ownership of that problem. And I think we've identified that also because, for example, MORC, the IETF, the government, or other organizations in this room have taken ownership of that challenge in front of us. And my next question is going towards that challenge because nothing becomes a success out of itself. So it means that you often have to get through barriers to get people to cooperate. And I would like some of you to reflect on the challenges that you run into and how did you get over them to make cooperation a success? Because that may lead to insight what others that are facing these challenges today or tomorrow could perhaps skip if we know how to name them and to put them in a nice row of best practices. So who would like to start with the challenge? Marco.
I think the biggest challenge, and coming from the technical community, in sort of starting best practices and communicating with people in what you would call other silos or other stakeholders, as we normally refer to them, is understanding that they might have a different perspective on the world you live in. And that's really sort of, that's the start, realizing that somebody might see things differently, might not have the technical knowledge to understand what you're working on. Once you've got that covered, you're on a good road down to start building that dialogue that could lead to the exchange of best practices. But first of all, realize who you're talking to and where they are coming from.
So an open ear and an open mind. Roelof.
You want me to stand? Okay. Well, I think many of the challenges are very common to any kind of collaboration. So there's trust or lack of trust in the beginning. So that's one of the challenges that you have to solve. How do we get these different parties to trust each other? And I think most of us will recognize that in the end, that's an individual process. Trust is between people, not between organizations. So you need some time to develop relationships between the people who are at the table. There has to be a shared sense of urgency. I think there has to be a shared sense of responsibility. There has to be, at a certain time, a kind of a division of roles and tasks and responsibilities. And I think the challenge of all challenges in many of these cases is you need means, money. And very often we see that there are all these good intentions, but the willingness to pay is sometimes difficult to find. So I think there I agree with you. That is one responsibility that very often an individual organization has to take this first step in. Okay, we find this so important, we will finance the first bit, and then very often one other organization or maybe a few step in, and in the end you get, and the Abuse Hub is that I just mentioned is a good example of that. It started with us, the registry, and our Ministry of Economic Affairs financing the creation of the organization. Now it's a membership model, so members pay a fee, and it now finances itself. But you need a few people in the end that can be backed up by organizations that really believe in the cause and are willing to stick out their neck and risk some money and get things going.
Yeah, thank you, Roelof. Before we respond, who recognizes what Roelof is saying? That is, at first, it's about trusting one another as people and not as organizations. So who recognizes that in their product, in their projects? Where I think that nearly everyone agrees to that. Also about taking ownership in the form of somebody has to finance this. Is that something which is recognizable? Show of hands, please. Not everybody agrees. So let's go to Jari. You're saying well, what's your experience?
Yeah, I mean, of course, different organizations work in different ways. So for us, for instance, at the IETF, it's about like the Walls implementers coming together and trying to do something. So it's really, they have their jobs and they have their ways of building software, and it's not that we have to finance that work, but it's for those people to be interested in making a fix or making an improvement.
But as I look at it from the outside, there's a lot of commitment that all the traveling and the work is done. Somebody has to finance that in the end.
Well, yeah, but it's sort of indirect. It's not that, like, our organization, for instance, needs money to do, some security improvement. It's that the vendors who build, let's say, a browser, they feel that they need to serve their customers better and provide better security, and that's why they come together to make standards. So it's not a direct, it's an indirect situation.
Well, Jari, maybe it's more direct than you think, because we send people to the ITF, and that's because we believe in your cause. And we pay them their salary, their hotel cost, and their trip. So I think I think you proved my point, in fact.
Thank you, Roelof. There are others who want to go back to the first question. Just start it. Okay, we'll start up front and we go to the second row.
So when we were talking about cooperation, the point that I want to make would touch into cost, because what we usually see people is overcomplicating cooperation and overcomplicating how much you need a very big budget, and you of course you need budget. Usually people ask for someone to make something, and in a national level in Brazil, most of our cooperation projects are voluntary in basis. So you have people volunteering their time, you have them volunteering a little bit, but you don't need to have like a big project from people to cooperate. So it's much more willingness, and these small projects of cooperation, they create trust. And we have been running a specific project of cooperation in Brazil for 13 years now. From our part, we just have our time. It's all volunteers. We engage people from private sector, critical infrastructure, universities, operators, ISPs, and it's a project that's been creating a community of trust in the technical capacity of everyone, and then ultimately you slowly create trust for sharing more sensitive information. So we also see a lot of people that they want a recipe or they want to sign an MOU and let's shall cooperate, and that's not really how it happens. So I think it goes for trust, but it also goes for everyone putting a little bit of money and not necessarily like huge costs into that.
And please state your name. I forgot to say that.
Oh,
with Roelof,
sorry,
but-
Christine from CERT Brazil.
Okay.
Martin van Hoornbeek from First. One thing that I wanted to add is that outside of cost, there's also scope. So when First got started initially, it was 5 members, and those 5 members could work together very, very easily because they knew each other and they could do anything. So First had very big goals when it originally got started. Today, First is over 350 members across the world, and there are many governments there that may not want to share a lot of information with each other, or there's organizations that don't really see sharing with each other as a primary goal. So one of the things that we see we have to do now is we actually have to build smaller groups within First, which we call special interest groups, where people actually get together in a smaller group to solve one specific problem. And quite often that problem isn't very contested. So it's not a very big or complex problem, but it's something they work on together. As they work on that smaller problem, they get to know each other, they get to trust each other better, and suddenly they're able to deal with much, much bigger issues over time. So that growth from a small problem to solving much bigger problems in the wider community is something that we've seen be very successful.
Thank you. Okay. I'll give him my phone.
Yeah, so I just wanted to follow up quickly on this ability to share, and whether governments or some other parties are able to share, and that kind of is an issue that I've been thinking about a lot, because we, the ITF, run a very open organization that anybody can sign up to a mailing list, and everything has to be discussed openly, and I'm kind of wondering how much we're losing. I mean, occasionally I hear rumors that there are these people who don't want to talk about this thing because they would have to do so openly. How can we solve that? That would be an interesting discussion topic.
Then, to make an observation and see if that is true or not from the responses, from what I see as the technical community, is that people chip in a little bit, each and every one, on commonly perceived technical problems that make the internet run or incidents being taken away. And what Roelof was talking about is that something which expands normal boundaries of corporations, like real competitors, exchanging information that may harm each other if one is unwilling to really cooperate, that takes more effort to get together than where everybody sort of agrees on the common problem. Is that something that this room recognizes in the sort of cooperation that you've had, or is it just coincidence? Please state your name.
Arne Gerkens from InHope and the Dutch hotline. Actually, it is what Roelof just said. It is who owns the problem, actually. So if we're looking at CSAM, child sexual abuse material, in the beginning it were like the internet service providers who said, we don't want this on our networks, but we also don't want to be the judge of the material. So what they did, they established the Dutch hotline, which was the first in the world, to deal with this material, to check it out. Then we engaged the problem that the police actually thought it was their job to do it. But the fact that we would do it anonymously made us get more reports than the police. Now we're at this big a volume that the police, if they would handle it, they wouldn't even have time to research it anymore. So, and now we see the problem that the internet service providers, for hosting providers, actually look at it like, is it still our problem? So we're also, in regard to funding, looking at a situation which I think is a common problem, a problem of the whole society, and we should deal with that. But we find it very hard to get funding because everybody's pointing at everybody like, okay, why should I pay that much? Why can't he? So we actually hear internet service providers or mobile operators say, yeah, why don't you ask Apple for money? Because, you know, it's their computers they're watching the material on, you know, that kind of discussion. So, yeah, still hard to break down those silos concerning that.
Hi, Liesel Franz again, the State Department. Trying to pick up on a few things that people have said and hope that what I say has some applicability, not just to governments, for the 6 of us or whatever in the room that are with governments, but has some applicability for others as well. I mean, we found that it was very difficult to move very, very far ahead in programmatic efforts to combat cybersecurity, either from sort of the technical side or from the policy side, when there was competition or concern about turf or concern about resources and money, and there seemed to be not common cause necessarily. People didn't feel like they were moving toward a common goal. And so, you know, unfortunately, we've had several incidents in the last 10 years that have driven us more to common cause, which isn't good necessarily, but at least we've used it to find a way to have higher level attention in the government, but I think that applies to businesses or organizations as well who might not have thought that the cybersecurity thing was a problem for them. So for a higher level attention, also creating a mechanism for collaboration that takes the coordinating role out of any of the vested interests and creates a neutral party to help bring the parties together. And be more of a team. So the international strategy for cyberspace that I mentioned was not written by any one particular agency in the US government. It was coordinated by a neutral party, White House, still, and brought all the players together so they all had buy-in and input from the very beginning. So I think while it's very government things to say, I hope there's some applicability for other kinds of organizations.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So Barry Liebe, talking about MOG. Responding to what Yari said about sharing information and whether maybe the IETF is missing something by being as open. I mean, I think the IETF has a different focus than an organization such as MOG. IETF is building open standards, and we need the standards to be open. We need the work that's being done to create those standards to be open. MOG is looking at doing best practices recommendations for combating abusive networks. And when you're building protocols to secure the networks, you do that in an open process. When you're trying to develop best practices, you need to be frank about what the problems in your own networks are, what the problems in your own behavior on your networks is. And companies are not too willing to be open about that publicly. So we have a more closed environment where the deal is that you're open about it within the organization, and then that's used to develop best practices to recommend to other organizations about what to do in their networks.
Thank you, Barry. I think the word common cause was mentioned by Liesel, but it comes up in several of what we're talking. So I think that common cause is another word that we have to put down towards our conclusion. I see Michael Kaiser, I see Belisario, and I see Marco, and then Roelof, and David. So everybody wants to talk. Very good. Continue.
I'll be really quick. I just want to reinforce a couple points. I think what Liesel said is really important. Like, we act as a neutral third party, and I think we see sometimes other neutral third parties, like the NCFTA in Pittsburgh. I don't know if you know the National Cyber, where and which dovetails, I think, into another issue around anonymity. So they created, in order to break down their silo, they was able to scrub data coming from one place and anonymize it and give it to another place because they knew the other place really needed that data. Like, here's all the credit cards that got lost in a recent data breach. We're not going to tell you which one it was, but they're your credit card holders, and you should know that information, right? You should have it. And so here you go. You don't know where it came from, but now you have it and you can act on it. And having an intermediary sometimes is very important. Let me just say about the common cause, I think it's absolutely critical that we work in a public-private partnership. You start with a narrow focus. We did education awareness. The common cause was every company and the federal government all working, trying to educate people, all going off like, spokes on a wheel, right? Come together, work together, share the IP that comes out of that process, share the expense of delivering the message out so you don't have to give money to one place. People can use their own resources that they've already allocated to do the thing. So there's a lot in the common cause and the common working together. And that neutrality of, it has to be an expert in the middle, but that neutrality is important because it means that everybody's interests get represented equally. And we work by consensus in those issues so that we know that we don't move ahead until everybody agrees. So I think those are other issues to address.
Thank you, Michael. I'm going to put my moderator hat off for 1 second because Marjolein Bondhuis of ECP could not be here, but they are a great example of such a neutral organization. For example, when Abuse Hub was in its incubation, the Ministry of Economic Affairs asked ECP to be the secretariat and provide the neutral table to which everybody could sit down and discuss the common cause. And there they built the trust actually to do what a couple of years later Roelof was talking about, creating Abuse Hub. And that's something which I do very many times. So now I'm putting my hat back on. From Michael, we go to Belisario.
Just about cost. And just a couple of weeks ago, we had a session with the Council of Europe and the European Union, actually on capacity building, cybersecurity capacity building projects. And one of the things that we have identified with them and World Bank, IDB, and other development institutions is that the needs are increasing and the funds are decreasing. There are actually key organizations and donors like the United States and Canada that have traditionally been providing these funds to especially developing countries. And they need to recognize that actually they need to chip in. And what we have seen in the region actually is that the funds are there. And there is a need to basically coordinate and see how they coordinate the spending on cybersecurity issues. Many agencies just spend the same money on the same things, and they just don't coordinate how they making those expenditures. We're also trying to reinforce what Michael was saying on the importance of public-private partnerships. We recognize that there are countries, for example, in Brazil, Christine, you say the CERBR, it's a non-profit organization, and it's a successful model. So it's a national CERB, provide an excellent service. So that model could be replicated also in other countries. So that's actually another good example of how developing countries could take advantage of that common cause. At the end, it's who is going to pay the bill and where are the funds going to, where it's going to come from. And the answer is the funds are there.
Next is Marco, then Europol. David and Marco. David, go ahead, and then it goes to Marco.
Okay, I keep it short. So I think besides the common goal, there are just two elements that I would add for being a cooperation successful, and that's some sort of equality between the people who are cooperating with each other, even if they are not equal, and getting results. I think that's also a very important element to make it work.
Thank you. Now, about you know me, I'm basically speaking as private. I want to be a bit controversial and maybe throw a spanner in the works here. But the internet, by and large, is privately owned. The infrastructure is privately owned. And actually, the space we're looking at, cybersecurity and cybercrime, is also largely commercialized. And so I want to challenge your notion of the commons is that some people will have a commercial advantage over others by having certain information about threats, vulnerabilities, and because they actually need to outperform the other ones, whether that's a virus company or a firewall company. So as much as we want to share that, I wonder how far this sharing is sort of worked against by commercial interest. We all have commercial interest to make the internet a better place. But in the end, some people make a large sum of money in actually having that knowledge about cybersecurity.
Yes, this is Paul Fenninger from Internet and Jurisdiction again. I just wanted to add one sort of nuance to this notion of having a common cause. Especially in a context where we talk about multi-stakeholder cooperation, I think one element that is often underestimated is the importance of framing the issues, and framing the issues in a way that transforms a problem that the actors have with each other into a common problem. And I think very often this is something that is overlooked and where not enough time is allocated. And I think one of the reasons for efficiency in multi-stakeholder cooperation, in bridging stakeholder groups and policy silos, is precisely taking the time to find common framing, find shared or define shared vernacular so that we all talk about the same things. And this is the prerequisite to have a shared vision of what can be achieved. This, I think, is something that is often overlooked.
Can you give one example where Paul? Can you give one example? Sorry, I'm asking a question to Paul. Can you give one example where you noticed that it didn't work, and another one where you said, okay, we discussed it and then it went forward, from your experience?
Well, I think it's the very, I mean, we are addressing the jurisdiction issue, right? And I think traditionally or historically, the problems that the actors perceived is that the companies or the governments had problems with the companies, civil society had problems with how the companies were dealing with those issues. So if you have the triangular relationship between those categories of actors, each was sort of in a confrontational mode, and most interactions happened on a bilateral thing. So it was advocacy between civil society and companies or governments. It was sort of the relationships between governments and companies in a sort of regulatory mode. And through dialogue, through ongoing multi-stakeholder dialogue, it has become clear that they actually have a problem in common, which is that we have problems applying the traditional jurisdictional mechanisms to the cross-border internet. And if we want to preserve the cross-border nature of the internet, we need to find solutions. And so I think our experience was that there was a real transformation, and we had the Global Internet and Jurisdiction Conference just 2 weeks ago. And there it was a key message, basically, that the different actors understood that they have a problem together that can only be addressed through cooperation.
Thank you. I'm going to. Oh, okay. Christine first. Dan gaat u.
I just want to jump in and to give a concrete example on a work that we did in Brazil. It was not easy. It was 7 years of multi-stakeholder dialogue, and it was to implement a very technical thing, that's Port 25 management. And it was to a point that there was a lot of problems. There were people that didn't want to implement because of a cost. They were afraid that the telecom regulator would fine them if they would do something. There were some consumer protection organizations that were thinking that someone was taking out their liberty of choosing whatever port they wanted to send email on. And actually, as a framing, CertBR participated at coordinating the technical lead, but CertBR is one of the services of NICBR, that is a not-for-profit organization, that is the one who implements all the directions of the Brazil Internet Steering Committee. That's a multi-stakeholder body. So it's formed by civil society, academia, by technical community, government. The non-government members are elected, and we usually are the ones that people look for to be this neutral ground, because you have all the stakeholders in that board. So the security being tied to the internet governance is very helpful. So at the end of those years, we talked with judges, with prosecutors, with the consumer protection organizations, the government organizations. So the consumer protection overseer gave official statements saying that that would not be problematic. And we had other people working with the technical community. We had some other organizations that joined in because they wanted to understand what were you doing. You were filtering things on the network. So it was a very fruitful work. It is difficult. Usually the technical community thinks that, oh, it takes too long, it's not worth it, but it is. Because after we had this discussion, nowadays when you have to discuss other topic that takes into account several multi-stakeholders, they always point to, oh, let's use the model that we did with Port 25 management. And now it doesn't take 7 years anymore. It takes like a year or less time. So I think it's worth the time to getting the stakeholders in, to making everyone to understand, and to really be having this discussion to discuss, okay, we have a common goal. Everyone has an angle, like the business don't want to spend money. The government has a tendency to overregulate. The civil society thinks that someone is doing something. So explaining the thing, everyone understands, oh, this is a good thing, so let's do it. But it's not 2 months that you're going to do it.
And it's a process of years to build the trust speed things up, but that it does pay off.
Yes.
Okay.
Roelof Meijer of SIDN again. Maybe I think one of the major components of many of the examples we have heard is the sharing of information. And I think that the more sensitive information is and the larger the group, the smaller the willingness to share. And Marco mentioned an example, and he gave maybe the impression that commercial interests are bad, but I don't think he meant that. I think he gave an example of where there is a chance that the information, the trust, is being misused. And I think a typical example is collaborations where security information is being shared. There's this, I love the phrase, if you have to be secret about your security probably sucks. So when there's a security incident, people are very unwilling to share that information to a larger group because there's a vulnerability. We want to fix it first, but then there's very often a low willingness to share the information because there was a up, and we don't want our superiors or our colleagues or our competitors to know that we did something wrong. We fixed it now, but we still don't want to talk about it. So I think one of the obstructions in this kind of a collaboration, where it's about sharing sensitive information, is that first, maybe damage can be done to your organization, and after that risk is taken away, damage can be done to your reputation, and that's still something that people try to avoid. I think another typical example where there is sometimes an impossibility to share information is in a relationship between governments and private organizations, especially on things that touch on security. We have our National Cybersecurity Center. We collaborate with them as many other private organizations, but their possibility to share information with us is limited by law and by all kinds of other factors. most of the time by the simple fact that they are not supposed to share information about criminal activities, but they have to act upon it.
Thank you. We have a remote comment or question. So,
It's Jan Jansen, a student at the University of Amsterdam, and it's a question for Marco. How can we assure the security on a private network?
there's a question for Marco. Sorry. So, raise your hands. You get the microphone. The girl does it.
Sorry, I got a bit distracted. Can you repeat?
Can you repeat the question, please?
How can we assure the security on private networks?
How can we secure the security of private networks? Yeah, you're basically if truly private, then the part of securing it is mostly physical. I would still recommend securing your devices and securing your networks because that physical barrier is easily broken. But yeah, a private network is in essence by design secure until somebody breaks into your private network, because then it's no longer private.
Okay.
I hope this answers your question.
I'm going to go to the next question I have, and I would like to ask people to reply in one sentence, because I think on this topic we could be here till tomorrow morning and probably still not stop talking. What was your major breakthrough in becoming a success? What was the biggest hurdle you had to take? I'm just going to start with Barry, and looking back, what did you have to break through to become a success?
Just in a success in sharing, I don't know that I would call it a breakthrough, but it was realizing that allowing people to share freely within the organization and trust each other to keep it within the organization, and then using that to make recommendations that benefit outside was the key for us, of not requiring people to share information publicly, but to feel free to do it within us.
So the word trust returns and making sure that it doesn't escape from the organization. Jari, and this is a long time back, before your time maybe.
Yeah, so I'm not sure these are breakthroughs either, about sort of where we're being mostly successful is when we can get the different parties together, that it's not just, say, the browser vendor and so on that does things, but also network, those who run networks underneath and who build devices that operate on the traffic in the middle, and so on and so forth. So that's the really crucial thing for us, at least. In doing anything, that you get the different parties in there.
Making sure people come to the place where it's at.
Yeah, Arle Gerkens. I think that would be the moment that we had an agreement with the police, the Dutch police, law enforcement, about handling the material and analyzing it. Because, the police felt threatened, of course, in their position. So now we have a protocol in place to watch child sexual abuse material is illegal. We will have a protocol in place with the public prosecutor that they will not prosecute us until we follow certain protocol and keep the regulations. So, yeah.
So establishing a protocol where necessary. Roelof.
Roelof Meijer. I think in the case of, but it's a difficult question to ask, but my observation is that in the case of the Abuse Hub, it is probably the fact that the government, the Ministry of Economic Affairs, said, okay, public sector, if you organize this, we will finance the starting of it. I think that was a kind of a recognition of the initiative and the support from the government that gave the parties involved the conviction that they were on the right track and they should really get this thing on.
So some support at the right moment in time by a key actor.
So yeah, and the financial bit of the support was important, but it was also the recognition by the government that this is a good thing. Do it.
Well, I think in the case of internet and jurisdiction, issues such as trust and recognition are very important. But I think the most important factor, and this is an ongoing process, is being able to involve a critical mass of actors that agree on the urgency of an issue, that agree on a framing of an issue, and that are willing to work together. And I think this is really important to reach this sort of critical mass of actors.
Thank you. Come to you, Lisa. Just
I would say in the case of FIRST, what I would call successes, things like the common vulnerability scoring system and so on, have been situations where we as an organization created the framework, we created the opportunity, and we created the location, and then someone really passionate stepped in and used those tools because we were the best place to get the job done. And I'd say those things taken together led to success for us.
thank you.
In the case of CERT in Brazil, for sure, number one for success is to gain trust and not to break that trust, but to learn how to share anonymized information and to learn to foster people sharing that information. But also another key was, as we are tied to NICBR and to a perceived as neutral organization, multi-stakeholder, that helped a lot to gain the trust. But you can't betray that trust. You need to do hard work to maintain that.
Also heard a new word, anonymization of sharing data.
Yeah, we share anonymized data. We never share complete data. A lot of people just want to have all the data they want. So we act as a place where people share the data with us. We anonymize the sensitive parts and share with other parts when needed. So a lot of people trust us with that information because they know that we will not break that trust. So we share data that we collect in some projects that we have, but we also have other people when they have either data breaches or other problems with security, and we act as a neutral point too.
Hi, Liesl Franz, State Department again. I want to touch on maybe an example in the cybercrime context a little bit more. And utilize the creation of the 24/7 network of law enforcement counterparts we utilized an existing framework within the G8 for connecting law enforcement representatives from the various countries and encouraging them to voluntarily share information, but using the framework of the G8 and then using also the Budapest Convention as a overarching frame. But then saying joining this network A is voluntary, but B, here's the incentive for doing so. There's a reason that you might want to join this network, is because not only can you come help get assistance from others, but you also get information from others when you might need it for something. So the incentive of collaboration. So I would say an overarching framework, voluntary, and incentive for you get something back for your participation in this network or organization or whatever it may be. So that's one example, perhaps, in the cybercrime world. And I'm sorry to do this, but I feel like we have sort of organically created the panel here, the non-panel here, and I might encourage our friends in the back half of the room to join the conversation and provide some examples that we might not know about.
That was my next question, but thank you for putting it up. But also thank you for mentioning law enforcement, because that hasn't been mentioned yet, and the G8 is another way where information is shared between.
I just want to add, in case it's not known to folks, that it's not now just the G8. The goal is also to build it out, and it's 100 some countries that participate in the G7 network, again, on a voluntary, collaborative basis.
Okay, we have another remote question, but please pass the microphone.
It's John Wright from the UK government representative. It's a question for Mr. Van Duren from the GFC. What role do funds play in the breaking down silos on the cybersecurity and cybercrime?
Yeah. Okay, I think, look, what's mentioned is that there are several elements that are important. And I think what is important, the most key element, I think, is, as the GFCE, what we try to facilitate is a bottom-up process, knowing what the needs are of members, and also to be flexible, because cyber still is a dynamic area. In the end, it is true that funds are a scarcity. So I think it's really important, and that's why one of the reasons the GFC is there, one of the ambitions is to put cyber capacity building higher on the political agenda from private organizations, from governments, to make more funds available. And the second thing is, if you have funds, you also have to be aware that you don't have any overlap. So another thing what we do is to try to get some sort of overview, who's doing what on what topic, and maybe in the future we can make better use of funds, so if we less duplicate. So that would be one of the goals. But in the end, yes, funds are really important and will be more and more important in the future, and I hope we will have more on the global level.
Just to add, from our side, it's the OAS, as maybe other IGOs, it's an intergovernmental organization. We are mandates-based. For us, has been successful the recognition that our member states have given of the involvement of private and civil society actors. Civil society includes the technical community and the academic community, because that has enabled us to work in a South-South collaboration model. Of course, funds are important, but you reduce a lot of the cost, or especially on capacity building projects, you reduce a lot of the cost when you work in that model. So we have been able to implement many activities and many initiatives based on that focus.
Thank you.
Hi, I want to quickly jump back to it's Marco again, Rivency. Quickly jump back. The lady here said something really important, and that's you have to create value. If you want to incentivize people of taking part in any initiative, there has to be some value for them. Now, obviously, funds do play a role, because if you get external funding and you can reduce the cost, then there might be an easier way to create value. But I also want to link back a bit to what Roelof said, and then I kind of have a bit of a question for him if he's willing to answer. When it comes down to incentivize people, then the old sort of rule of thumb is stimulate where you can, regulate where you must. How far would you say is sort of the having the involvement of a ministry and sort of in funding also might be perceived as sort of very soft regulation? The foreland, the ministry stimulating, knowing that the next step would be regulating. I wonder if that played a role there in the Dutch market.
Oh, I'm very willing to answer that question. I think it's true. Maybe not in this particular case, but I think we're from the same country. This is a policy that our ministry very often applies, and I think it's a good policy. So they're relatively reluctant to regulate. But so they stimulate, and if the private sector doesn't react, then they'll regulate. And they know, and the private sector knows, that regulation is always less effective than if we solve the problem ourselves, and that is less effective than solving the problem together. So I think it's the right approach. And you say, okay, let's try to solve the problem together. We're willing to contribute by providing information, providing funds, providing staff, whatever. You have to contribute as well, and if you don't, well, then in the end we'll have to regulate, because the problem will have to go away, and there will be probably collateral damage. So yeah, I think it's a recognizable approach, and I think it works in many cases, not always, but sometimes I find it a pity that such light pressure from the government is necessary to get the private sector moving, but it seems to be a fact of life in certain cases.
Thank you, Roelof. And now I'm going to turn to the back. who is here actually to learn from this discussion and to bring this home? And what is it what you would like to learn? Anybody? All the panelists would like to learn, but we knew that from all the comments. Who would like to share their experience or question to this natural born panel?
Maybe refresh. Who of you said something, hey, I heard something new, I'm gonna try this?
So let's I see Nick from the UK government wanted to comment. So, okay, that's it for best practices, and see you tomorrow. But Nick is going to comment anyway.
Okay, Nick, UK government. So, I've heard some really interesting stuff. What I've picked up is the importance of recognizing the value to your partner when you're trying to sort of stimulate an initiative and collaboration. The importance of trust. And that's certainly something I've known myself when I used to do investigations, and you're trying to engage with sort of industry players, ISPs, sort of cybersecurity professionals, developing that trust and understanding that you may need to step outside your own comfort zone. I think the other thing the UK government has probably learnt in the last 4 or 5 years or so is the importance of transparency about what you're trying to achieve, and I think someone mentioned that earlier. Transparency about what you're truly trying to achieve and how you're doing that as well. If you're transparent and open, and sometimes that's a very difficult thing for governments, but if you're transparent and open as far as possible, people will be more willing to come on board and accept the occasions when you can't be truly open. So I've certainly picked up on sort of those themes, and those are things that we'll take back and sort of consider when we do all our multi-stakeholder outreach that influences our sort of policy development processes and initiatives.
Thank you, Nick. The word transparency from a government point of view comes. Arda would like to respond. Arda? Here.
You're absolutely right. If I look at my line of work, we also work together with organizations like Facebook. And they have, like has been said before, of course, a big risk of, and their name being damaged. So it's not only transparency, it's also integrity. So every time when we report to either Facebook or another platform or the internet hosting provider, we have to make absolutely sure that the image is unlawful, because otherwise they might, get the blame for taking down material which is not unlawful. So we need to be really transparent and integer about what we're doing, so they can trust us.
Thank you. Just to come back, somewhat jokingly about we can go to the pub and have a beer. When we announced this workshop and fed it through several channels, we got a lot of responses from Pacific Island states, from Africa, from South America, from Asia, and all these people said, but I can't afford to come to the IGF. And actually they were very much interested to learn what to do, because they were facing these sort of challenges that we're discussing at this moment. And that's why we're going to try to make some best practices based on your input and see how we can share that or perhaps expand on it in some way in the future. So something will be done to it, and it will reach the right persons through the same channels that we started out with. So it is not that we're discussing this here and we can afford to be here, but that doesn't mean that everybody else can. I've got a final question where we're going to try to do some sort of a wrap up, and I'm already looking to Tail to help me there. what is the thing that you would really like to achieve at this moment, which you're at this moment not able or not able enough to do? And I'm going to start with Michael, because it's a challenge that you still like to tackle right now, and perhaps also who do you need or think you need to achieve that? Just raise your hand and you get the microphone.
I think a challenge in the education awareness space, people have challenges in other spaces, I'm sure, is the continued connectivity between all of us that are doing the work, right? And how do we work together at a global scale that really builds on the successes that many people have had in many countries around the world, not just the United States? How do we share that information in ways, and how do we build a community together? Even with this fantastic internet, it's still hard to learn who everybody is, to develop relationships over long distances, and to have the opportunities, IGF being one of them, to come together to really share in an open way, and to find ways to partner and collaborate. I think that's just, maybe it's part of human nature, and so that's part of it too. So you can't overcome human nature, maybe you can, I don't know. But I think that's a challenge that we would love to continue to work on, we're open to working on, and to do it in an open, neutral, sharing, collaborative, toward the best ends for everyone kind of way.
Thank you. Just one question. You're involved with Stop, Think, Connect, and I understand that you're trying to reach out to as much countries as possible to adopt that approach.
Yeah. Yeah, not just to adopt that approach, but to adopt a commitment to education and awareness. If they use Stop, Think, Connect, we love that. But to really, to make this, I mean, look, it's simple, like, what's the problem you have to solve? The problem you have to solve is that every single person who uses the internet needs to know how to use it safely and securely, and there's not one of us who's going to do that on our own, right? No government, no nonprofit, can do this on their own, right? We have to do this together. So that's the challenge we always face.
And that's, I think, an important thing to notice, that that's an important challenge. I'm going to Marco. You also work with law enforcement, I know from experience, from my past head. Are there challenges there that you still need to break through, or are you happy with where you are?
There's always more to wish for. There's always more to build on. I think we come a long way, especially with law enforcement, in managing the perception, managing the expectations, and actually get them to participate in our fora. The law enforcement now see the RERs as a partner, see the RER communities as a group that can actually make a change and participate in these fora to drive that change. So that's an important part. To come back to your some more of earlier overarching question is like, what would you sort of put big on your wish list? And that is really for people to keep sharing and make sure that people can learn from our mistakes. And it was brought up very early in the past that it's often sort of security incidents, and especially the fixes applied get easily mopped away, because a lot of these things just happen by sheer stupidity. And it's really hard to sort of admit that you're stupid, but please do so, and please share that for other people to learn from. So that would be the top of my wish list. Keep learning.
Thank you. Would like to be next.
I'm sure that there are many challenges I could probably answer, but I'll pick one. We have, as governments in our infinite wisdom over the course of years, have instituted laws for very good reasons at the time to, in the case I'm using, to stop information sharing, essentially, or prohibit it. And it has become an impediment, legal impediment, to information sharing between companies, or between companies and government, or between government and the public. And so what I would say is, rather than finding laws that would continue to restrict, that would restrict or regulate, finding ways to either create laws or adjust existing laws to enable information sharing. That's the challenge we have.
Thank you.
Yeah, actually I can add to that, because we see an enormous rise of material on the internet, and we cannot do it by human resource alone. And we know we have a lot of techniques to solve this problem. but there are laws against it because it can also be abused, these techniques. So that's a challenge to us too, and I would love to use these techniques to get the material from the internet, but then again, you know, you might have the privacy laws that will. So here's a challenge.
Is there a challenge for the oldest organization in this room, the IGF, that you still would like to conquer, Jari? Or you're totally happy?
No, I'm not totally happy. There's still some work to be done in the internet security area for some reason, as you probably know. The one challenge that is in my mind right now is when, you know, it's easy when you have like very clearly separated things that, you know, we'll provide you guys this and some other people that something else, and they're not in conflict. But many things that we develop have sort of consequences elsewhere. As an example, we've been progressing further. The world has been progressing further on, you know, more encrypted communications, and the IETF has worked on that. We worked on more efficient communication also for the web, and that has impacted network operators, for instance, and their ability to do traffic management. And trying to deal with these changes as we improve technology is sometimes challenging. So that's an ongoing thing for us.
The real world found you, in some other words. As a question, who thinks in your own private silo you have open doors that are easily accessed by other organizations? Who thinks that he's working right? So who, okay, then maybe I have to rephrase. You all work within your silo because that's what we are talking about here. Do you have your front door open, and do other organizations walk in to discuss the topics with you? And now I see your hands, please. Okay, how many? 2.
I've seen 14 hands and a half from Marka.
Okay.
14 hands.
And without mentioning names, do you know organizations that do not sufficiently or not at all have their front door open, which you would like to have open? Don't name names, but just raise hands. So that's a fairly sufficient.
6 hands on that
6
side.
hands. So the others are happy with where they are. I think we reached sort of a natural conclusion and within time, but we're going to ask Tijl to assist me with trying to define the best practice using scoring topics and specific definitions and names and words. So I'm going to Tijl and see if we can come up with something, and which will undoubtedly need a lot of improvement, because I don't have the assumption we could do all here, but I think it's a start of a discussion that may help the world forward in those places where they're still struggling. So Tijl, what have you found?
Yeah, I've written down a lot of keywords, basically, that have been said. And, well, let's start with trust. I think that it's the one that came up most. And it was said that for trust, you need perspective about each other. You need to know each other's perspective. You need equality. Yeah, you want transparency. And transparency is also sometimes hard because it might fight your commercial interests. That's why integrity is also very important. You need anonymization, and apart from that, it's important to check if you're not threatening positions of other, well, for example, law enforcement, but also other organizations, to make sure that they are willing to trust you and to work together. And therefore, it's important to step out of your comfort zone. It's important sometimes to have neutral bodies between organizations that need to work together. And of course, it's important to have aligned goals and a common cause. And it's important to show to all different parties how value is created for everyone, and to make sure that everyone gets something out of collaboration. Apart from that, money is important, and to get money, sometimes it's important to have an overview of everything that's happening, make sure that nobody is doing the same work in different ways for the same amounts of money. And next to money, it's also important to get recognition and a little push sometimes. So, and it was said, I think what's important is that, you know, transparency is also a big risk, and not only for the reputation. So there's a risk by being transparent for your reputation, but there's also a risk for the damage of the organization. And if you don't share, in the end, the last one might be the bigger risk, but that's hard. So what helps is if companies are convinced to work, not only companies, organizations, to work together voluntarily. It's important to realize how sensitive the issues are. What was also said is it's important to stimulate before regulate. So the quote here was, stimulate where you can, regulate where you must. And also it was clear that stimulation was often, and funding is often the first step by, for example, when a government funds something, that might indicate that if there's nothing going to be done, regulation is going to follow. And I think the last thing I heard, which I found interesting, was that you need critical mass to make something a success. So I think that's some of the things that I heard that sort of came back by different comments.
Okay, Tel, thank you very much, and I think he deserves an applause for this. We've got a final remote participant question.
No, it's just for the record. Remote also raised his hand on their first question.
Thank you. Now I'm going to be a bit vulnerable myself, because I think we did something here which may never have happened before at the IGF, so have no one on the panel, no presentations, no slides. Did you think this setup worked? That we actually pulled out information which is valuable to the rest of the world, or should we do it in a different way, if ever, next time? So were you comfortable in this setting? And did you hear the things that you were hoping to hear or expected to hear? So I think we did something right. So with that, I would like to thank you very much for your participation. I would like to thank Tijl and in the back Mario for making notes, our remote assistant, even the cameraman and everybody doing the transcript. And with the rest, I hope you have a great IGF and stay in Guadalajara and a safe trip home. And with that, I thank you again for your participation in this.